Incarceration and Mental Illness by Jordan Rorty. Even though it is a constitutional right for the individuals who are incarcerated to receive medical and mental health services, the U.S. seems to fall short in providing adequate care. Federal and local inmates are disproportionately affected by mental illness in the United States. There's an overwhelming need for increased mental health services and diversion programs to help mentally ill inmates get the help that they need to successfully reintegrate back into society. The criminal justice system is not set up to run as a hospital. The harsh environment of incarceration can exacerbate mental health issues. Mentally ill individuals often encounter barriers to treatment, which result in self-medication and criminal behaviors, contributing to reoffending. Suicide is the leading cause of death in correctional facilities, many of those who are suffering with mental illness. If adequate mental health resources are not put into play, we will continue to senselessly lose lives at a rapid pace. These losses hurt community systems and family dynamics. I work with incarcerated and newly released women every day, and the inadequate services that they are provided in their mental health can have devastating impacts. Many of the ladies that I work with suffer with behavioral issues, limited cognitive function, and decision-making difficulty that make it very difficult reintegrating back into society. In 2015, the Sentencing Project ranked states' rates of incarceration with access to mental health. The study found that the states with the lowest access to mental health had the highest rates of incarceration and recidivism. These disadvantaged voices are being heard through protests, consensus organizing, social media campaigns of others sharing their experiences. We need clear policies to protect the treatment and access to more appropriate services for inmates and grant funding for partnerships with mental health facilities for inmates to receive treatment instead of punishment. The mental health needs of inmates affect a large number of stakeholders. By ignoring the root of the mental health crisis, there's an overwhelming burden placed on our already overwhelmed social service responders. We will still need more information on the long-term success on recidivism rates of these programs over a continual scope, but it is looking promising. There are strong community and political tensions in play when discussing the criminal justice system. Many people in the community and politicians believe that inmates with mental illness do not deserve special treatment. If our society already has a hard time providing mental health services to law-abiding citizens, why should we prioritize those services to those who committed a crime? There's a stigma that needs to be addressed when looking at the mental health services in our criminal justice system. By prioritizing these services, they will help shape our communities and build stronger engagement long-term. The target for change is to successfully help individuals reintegrate back into society. By increasing inmates' access to mental health services and diversion programs, we'd be reducing the likelihood of recidivism and building stronger family bonds. Former incarcerated individuals would have more tools to emotionally regulate, become productive members of society, and potentially break generational cycles of poverty. The proposed intervention strategy would consist of major partnerships between the Department of Corrections, established mental health providers, and criminal courts. Upon intake, inmates would be screened for mental illnesses by established mental health provider. The results would then be disseminated and discussed among the Department of Corrections and criminal courts, and a treatment plan would be put into place on the best course of action. If the inmate did not meet criteria for other resources available in the community or alternative treatment, the inmate would then be connected to mental health resources through a consistent partner. While incarcerated, they would receive medical interventions such as psychoeducation, medical therapies, and therapy services. By using an informed care approach, inmates will have a better opportunity for healing and rehabilitation. Corporate funders and political figures that align with increased mental health services for inmates are key players in creating change and reducing stigma. Community-based organizations and personal experiences of these inmates will provide vital insight for necessary trauma-informed care and policy. Through increased federal funding and grant resources, more correctional facilities will have the opportunity to increase mental health services provided and decreasing potential dangerous behaviors and recidivism. Theories guiding this intervention are strength-based theory, person and environment theory, organizational and interorganizational theories. The specific goal of this intervention is to help inmates with mental illness have increased access to mental health services and programs to reduce recidivism. If we treat these individuals and help them become productive members of society, we will ultimately reduce the cost of spending over time. A study in 2003 done in Texas found that it costs $22,000 a year to house a regular inmate, as opposed to $30,000 to $50,000 a year for those with mental illness. This intervention is sustainable, but will take considerable time to implement. The justice system is slow-moving and complicated infrastructure. If appropriate federal and grant funding is allocated towards providing these mental health services and additional staffing across the board, we will hopefully aid in long-term successful members of society. The long-term effects would be sustainable due to the potential less overwhelm on the system when looking at recidivism rates. There also needs to be policies in place to outline a standard of care for mental health for incarcerated individuals. This complicated and detailed process would involve contracts from the Department of Corrections, general courts, and mental health providers. We would need increased funding for additional staff and treatment, and these additional funds might be raised through grant programs and reallocation of tax dollars. We also need strong community partnership and engagement to reduce stigma around criminal activity and mental illness, and we need strong advocacy for standardized mental health and medical care among correctional facilities. There are potential challenges of limited funding due to mental health and criminal stigmas, and there are concerns for community pushback due to these stigmas. The lengthy process of enacting policy within the justice system and mental health systems can also be discouraging when looking at these processes. But ultimately, it will provide a safe and beneficial place for these inmates to work on their recovery.